Eddard. "I stood the last vigil for him myself," Sir Barristan Selmy said as they looked down at the body in the back of the cart. "He had no one else. A mother in the Vale, I'm told." In the pale dawn light, the young knight looked as though he was sleeping. He had not been handsome, but death had smoothed his rough-hewn features, and the Silent Sisters had dressed him in his best velvet tunic, with a high collar to cover the ruin the lance had made of his throat. Eddard Stark looked at his face, and wondered if it had been for his sake that the boy had died. Slain by a Lannister bannerman before Ned could speak to him. Could that be mere happenstance? He supposed he would never know. "Hugh was John Arryn's squire for 4 years," Selmy went on. "The king knighted him before he rode north in John's memory. The lad had wanted it desperately, yet I fear he was not ready." Ned had slept badly last night and felt tired beyond his years. "None of us is ever ready," he said. "For knighthood?" "For death." Gently Ned covered the boy with his cloak, a blood-stained bit of blue bordered in crescent moons. When his mother asked why her son was dead, he reflected bitterly. They would tell her he'd fought to honour the king's hand, Eddard Stark. This was needless. War should not be a game. Ned turned to the woman beside the cart, shrouded in grey, face hidden but for her eyes. The Silent Sisters prepared men for the grave, and it was ill fortune to look on the face of death. "Send this armour home to the Vale. The mother will want to have it." "It is worth a fair piece of silver," Sir Barristan said. "The boy had it forged special for the tourney. Plain work, but good. I do not know if he finished paying the smith." "He paid yesterday, my lord, and he paid dearly," Ned replied, and to the Silent Sister he said, "Send the mother the armour. I'll deal with the smith." She bowed her head. Afterwards Sir Barristan walked with Ned to the king's pavilion. The camp was beginning to stir. Fat sausages sizzled in spit over fire pits, spicing the air with the scents of garlic and pepper. Young squires hurried on errands as their masters woke, yawning and stretching to meet the day. A serving man with a goose under his arm bent his knee when he caught sight of them. "My lords," he muttered as the goose honked and pecked at his fingers. The shields displayed outside each tent heralded its occupant. The silver eagle of Seaguard, Bryce Caron's field of nightingales, a cluster of grapes for the red wines, brindled boar, red ox, burning tree, white ram, triple spiral, purple unicorn, dancing maiden, black adder, twin towers, horned owl, and last the pure white blazon of the King's Guard, shining like the dawn. "The king means to fight in the melee today," Sir Barristan said as they were passing Sir Meryn's shield, its paint sullied by a deep gash where Loras Tyrell's lance had scarred the wood as he drove him from the saddle. "Yes," Nid said grimly. Jory had woken him last night to bring him that news. Small wonder he'd slept so badly. Sir Barristan's look was troubled. "They say night beauties fade at dawn, and the children of wine are disowned in the morning light." "They say so," Ned agreed, "but not of Robert." Other men might reconsider words spoken in drunken bravado, but Robert Baratheon would remember, and remembering would never back down. The king's pavilion was close to the water, and morning mists off the river had wreathed it in wisps of grey. It was all of golden silk, the largest and grandest structure in the camp. Outside the entrance, Robert's warhammer was displayed beside an immense iron shield blazoned with the crowned stag of House Baratheon. Ned had hoped to discover the king still abed in a wine-soaked sleep, but luck was not with him. They found Robert drinking beer from a polished horn and roaring his displeasure at 2 young squires who were trying to buckle him into his armour. "Your Grace," one was saying, almost in tears, "it's made too small. It won't go." He fumbled, and the gorget he was trying to fit round Robert's thick neck tumbled to the ground. "7 ells," Robert swore. "Do I have to do it myself? Piss on both of you! Pick it up! Don't just stand there gaping, Lancel! Pick it up!" The lad jumped, and the king noticed his company. "Look at these oafs, Ned. My wife insisted I take these 2 to squire for me, and they're worse than useless. Can't even put a man's armour on him properly. Squires, they say. I say they're swineherds dressed up in silk. Ned only needed a glance to understand the difficulty. The boys are not at fault, he told the king. You're too fat for your armour, Robert. Robert Baratheon took a long swallow of beer, tossed the empty horn onto his sleeping furs, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and said darkly, Fat? Fat, is it? Is that how you speak to your king? He let go his laughter, sudden as a storm. Ah, damn you, Ned, why are you always right? The squires smiled nervously until the king turned on them. You! Yes, both of you. You heard the hand. The king is too fat for his armour. Go find Sir Aaron Santagar and tell him I need the breastplate stretcher. Now, what are you waiting for? The boys tripped over each other in their haste to be quit of the tent. Robert managed to keep a stern face until they were gone. Then he dropped back into a chair, rocking with laughter. Sir Barristan Selmy chuckled with him. Even Eddard Stark managed a smile. Always, though, the graver thoughts crept in. He could not help taking note of the two squires. Handsome boys, fair and well-made. One was Sansa's age, with long golden curls. The other perhaps 15, sandy-haired, with a wisp of a moustache and the emerald-green eyes of the Queen. I wish I could be here to see Santagar's face, Robert said. I hope he'll have the wit to send them to someone else. We ought to keep them running all day. Those boys? Ned asked him. Lannisters? Robert nodded, wiping tears from his eyes. Cousins. Son of Lord Tywin's brother. One of the dead ones, or perhaps the live one, now come to think on it. I don't recall. My wife comes from a very large family, Ned. A very ambitious family, Ned thought. He'd nothing against the squires, but it troubled him to see Robert surrounded by the Queen's kin, waking and sleeping. The Lannister appetite for offices and honours seemed to know no bounds. The talk is you and the Queen had angry words last night. The mirth curdled on Robert's face. The woman tried to forbid me to fight in the melee. She's sulking in the castle now, damn her. Your sister would have never shamed me like that. You never knew Lyanna as I did, Robert, Ned told him. You saw her beauty, but not the iron underneath. She would have told you you had no business in the melee. You too, the king frowned. You're a sour man, Stark. Too long in the north. All the juices have frozen inside of you. Well, mine are still running. He slapped his chest to prove it. You are the king, Ned reminded him. I sit on the damn iron seat when I must. Does that mean I can't have the same hungers as other men? A bit of wine every now and then, a girl squealing in bed, the feel of a horse between my legs. 7 hells, Ned. I want to hit someone. Sir Barristan Selmy spoke up. Your Grace, he said, it is not seemly that the king should ride into the melee. It would not be a fair contest. Who would dare strike you? Robert seemed honestly taken aback. Why, all of them, damn it, if they can. And the last man left standing will be you, Ned finished. He saw at once that Selmy had hit the mark. The dangers of the melee were only a savour to Robert, but this touched his pride. Sir Barristan is right. There's not a man in the 7 kingdoms who would dare risk your displeasure by hurting you. The king rose to his feet, his face flushed. Are you telling me those prancing cravens will let me win? For a certainty, Ned said, and Sir Barristan Selmy bowed his head in silent accord. For a moment Robert was so angry that he could not speak. He strode across the tent, whirled, strode back, his face dark and angry. He snatched up his breastplate from the ground and threw it at Barristan Selmy in a wordless fury. Selmy dodged. Get out, the king said then, coldly. Get out before I kill you. Sir Barristan left quickly. Ned was about to follow when the king called out again. Not you, Ned. Ned turned back. Robert took up his horn again, filled it with beer from a barrel in the corner, and thrust it at Ned. Drink, he said brusquely. I've no thirst. Drink! Your king commands it. Ned took the horn and drank. The beer was black and thick, so strong it stung the eyes. Robert sat down again. Damn you, Ned Stark. You and John Aaron. I loved you both. What have you done to me? You were the one who should have been king. You were John. You had the better claim, your grace. I told you to drink, not argue. You made me king. You could have at least had the courtesy to listen when I talk, damn you. Look at me, Ned. Look at what kinging has done to me. Gods. Too fat for my armour. How did it ever come to this? Robert, drink and stay quiet. The king is talking. I swear to you, I was never so alive when I was winning this throne, or so dead now as I've won it. And Cersei, I've John Aaron to thank for her. I had no wish to marry after Lyanna was taken from me, but John said the realm needed an heir. Cersei Lannister would be a good match, he told me. She would bind Lord Tywin to me should Viserys Targaryen ever try to win back his father's throne. The king shook his head. I love that old man, I swear it. And now I think he was a bigger fool than Moon Boy. Oh, Cersei is lovely to look at, truly, but cold. The way she guards her cunt, you'd think she'd have all the gold of Casterly Rock between her legs. Yeah, give me that beer if you won't drink it. He took the horn, upended it, belched, wiped his mouth. I am sorry for your girl, Ned, truly. About the wolf, I mean. My son was lying, I'd stake my soul on it. My son. You love your children, don't you? With all my heart, Ned said. Let me tell you a secret, Ned. More than once I've dreamed of giving up the crown. Take ship for the free cities with my horse and my hammer. Spend my time warring and whoring. That's what I was made for. The sellsword king. How the singers would love me. You know what stops me? The thought of Joffrey on the throne with Cersei standing behind him whispering in his ear. My son. How could I have made a son like that, Ned? He's only a boy, Ned said awkwardly. He had small liking for Prince Joffrey, but he could hear the pain in Robert's voice. Have you forgotten how wild you were at that age? It wouldn't trouble me if the boy was wild, Ned. You don't know him as I do. He sighed and shook his head. Perhaps you're right. John despaired of me often enough, yet I grew into a good king. Robert looked at Ned and scowled at his silence. You might speak up and agree, you know. Your Grace, Ned began carefully. Robert slapped Ned on the head. Say that I'm a better king than Aerys and be done with it. You never could lie for the love of honor, Ned Stark. I'm still young, and now that you're here with me, things will be different. We'll make this a reign to sing of, and damn the Lannisters to seven hills. I smell bacon. What do you think our champion will be today? Have you seen Mace Tyrell's boy? The Knight of the Flowers, they call him. Now there's a son any man could be proud of. Last tourney he dumped the Kingslayer on his golden rump. You ought to have seen the look on Cersei's face. I laughed till my sides hurt. Renly says he has this sister, a maid of 14, lovely as a dawn. They broke their fast on the black bread and boiled goose eggs, and fish fried up with onions and bacon, at a trestle table by the river's edge. The king's melancholy melted away with the morning mist, and before long Robert was eating an orange, and waxing fond about a morning at the Eyrie when they'd been boys. I'd given John a barrel of oranges, remember? Only things had gone rotten, so I flung mine across the table and hit Dax right square in the nose. You remember Redfort's pock-faced squire? He tossed one back at me, and before John could so much as fart, there were oranges flying all over the high hall in every direction. He laughed uproariously, and even Ned smiled, remembering. This was the boy he'd grown up with, he thought. This was the Robert Baratheon he'd known and loved. If he could prove that the Lannisters were behind the attack on Bran, prove that they'd murdered John Arryn, this man would listen. Then Cersei would fall and the Kingslayer with her, and if Lord Tywin dared to rouse the West, Robert would smash him as he'd smashed Rhaegar Targaryen on the Trident. He could see it all so clearly. The breakfast tasted better than anything Eddard Stark had eaten in a long time, and afterward his smiles came easier and more often, until it was time for the tournament to resume. Ned walked with the king to the jousting field. He had promised to watch the final tilts with Sansa. Septa Mordain was ill today, and his daughter was determined not to miss the end of the jousting. As he saw Robert to his place, he noticed that Cersei Lannister had chosen not to appear. The place beside the king was empty. That too gave Ned cause to hope. He shouldered his way to where his daughter was seated and found her as the horns blew for the day's first joust. Sansa was so engrossed she scarcely seemed to notice his arrival. Sandor Clegane was the first rider to appear. He wore an olive-green cloak over his soot-grey armour. That and his hound's head helm were the only concession to ornament. 100 gold dragons on the Kingslayer, Littlefinger announced loudly as Jaime Lannister entered the lists, riding an elegant blood-bay destrier. The horse wore a blanket of gilded ringmail, and Jaime glittered from head to heel. Even his lance was fashioned from the golden wood of the Summer Isles. "Done!" Lord Renly shouted back. "The hound has a hungry look about him this morning." "Even hungry dogs know better than to bite the hand that feeds them," Littlefinger called dryly. Sandor Clegane dropped his visor with an audible clang and took up his position. Sir Jaime tossed a kiss to some woman in the Commons, gently lowered his visor, and strode to the end of the lists. Both men crouched, their lances. Ned Stark would have loved nothing so well as to see them both lose, but Sansa was watching it almost moist-eyed and eager. The hastily erected gallery trembled as the horses broke into a gallop. The hound leaned forward as he rose, his lance rock steady, but Jaime lifted his seat deftly in the instant before impact. Clegane's point was turned harmlessly against the golden shield with the lion blazon, while his own hit square. Wood shattered and the hound reeled, fighting to keep his seat. Sansa gasped. A ragged cheer went up from the Commons. "I wonder how I ought to spend your money," Littlefinger called down to Renly. The hound just managed to stay in the saddle. He jerked his mount round hard and rode back to the list for the second pass. Jaime Lannister tossed down his broken lance and snatched up a fresh one, jesting with his squire. The hound spurred forward at a hard gallop. Lannister rode to meet him. This time, when Jaime lifted his seat, Sandor Clegane shifted with him. Both lances exploded, and by the time the splinters had settled, a riderless blood bay was trotting off in search of grass, while Sir Jaime Lannister rolled in the dirt, golden and dented. Sansa said, "I knew the hound would win." Littlefinger overheard. "If you know who's going to win the second match, speak up now before Lord Renly plucks me clean," he called to her. Ned smiled. "A pity the imp isn't here with us," Lord Renly said. "I should have won twice as much." Jaime Lannister was back on his feet, but his ornate lion helmet had been twisted round and dented in his fall, and now he couldn't get it off. The Commons were hooting and pointing, the lords and ladies were trying to stifle their chuckles, and failing, and over it all Ned could hear King Robert laughing, louder than anyone. Finally, they had to lead the Lion of Lannister off to a blacksmith, blind and stumbling. By then, Sir Gregor Clegane was in position at the head of the lists. He was huge, the biggest man that Eddard Stark had ever seen. Robert Baratheon and his brothers were all big men, as was the Hound, and back at Winterfell there was a simple-minded stable boy named Hodor who dwarfed them all. But the knight they called the Mountain That Rides would have towered over Hodor. He was well over 7 feet tall, closer to 8, with massive shoulders and arms as thick as the trunks of small trees. His destrier seemed a pony in between his armoured legs, and the lance he carried looked as small as a broom handle. Unlike his brother, Sir Gregor did not live at court. He was a solitary man who seldom left his own lands but for wars and tourneys. He'd been with Lord Tywin when King's Landing fell, a new-made knight of 17 years, even then distinguished by his size and his implacable ferocity. Some said it had been Gregor who dashed the skull of the infant Prince Aegon Targaryen against a wall, and whispered that afterward he had raped the mother, the Dornish princess Elia, before putting her to the sword. These things were not said in Gregor's hearing. Ned Stark could not recall ever speaking to the man, although Gregor had ridden with them during Balon Greyjoy's rebellion, one night among thousands. He watched him with disquiet. Ned seldom put much stock in the gossip, but the things said of Sir Gregor were more than ominous. He was soon to be married for the 3rd time, and one heard dark whisperings about the deaths of his first 2 wives. It was said that his keep was a grim place where servants disappeared unaccountably, and even the dogs were afraid to enter the hall. And there had been a sister who died young under queer circumstances, and the fire that had disfigured his brother, and the hunting accident that killed their father. Gregor had inherited the keep, the gold, and the family estates. His younger brother Sandor had left the same day to take service with the Lannisters as a sworn sword, and it was said that he had never returned, not even to visit. When the Knight of Flowers made his entrance, a murmur ran through the crowd, and he heard Sansa's fervent whisper, "Oh, he's so beautiful." Sir Loras Tyrell was slender as a reed, dressed in a suit of fabulous silver armour, polished to a blinding sheen and filigreed with twining black vines and tiny blue forget-me-nots. The commons realized in the same instant as Ned that the blue of the flowers came from sapphires. A gasp went up from 1,000 throats. Across the boy's shoulders, his cloak hung heavy. It was woven of forget-me-nots, real ones, hundreds of fresh blossoms sewn to a heavy woolen cape. His courser was as slim as her rider, a beautiful grey mare built for speed. Sir Gregor's huge stallion trumpeted as he caught her scent. The boy from Highgarden did something with his legs, and his horse pranced sideways, nimble as a dancer. Sansa clutched at his arm. "Father, don't let Sir Gregor hurt him," she said. Ned saw she was wearing the rose that Sir Loras had given her yesterday. Jory had told him about that as well. "These are tourney lances," he told his daughter. "They make them to splinter on impact so no one is hurt." Yet he remembered the dead boy in the cart with his cloak of crescent moons, and the words were raw in his throat. Sir Gregor was having trouble controlling his horse. The stallion was screaming and pawing the ground, shaking his head. The mountain kicked at the animal savagely with an armoured boot. The horse reared and almost threw him. The Knight of Flowers saluted the king, rode to the far end of the lists, crouched his lance, ready. Sir Gregor brought his animal to the line, fighting with the reins. And suddenly it began. The mountain stallion broke into a hard gallop, plunging forward wildly, while the mare charged as smooth as a flow of silk. Sir Gregor wrenched his shield into position, juggled with his lance, and all the while fought to hold his unruly mount on a straight line. And suddenly Loras Tyrell was on him, placing the point of his lance just there. And in an eye blink the mountain was falling. He was so huge that he took his horse down with him in a tangle of steel and flesh. Ned heard applause, cheers, whistles, shocked gasps, excited muttering, and over it all was the rasping, raucous laughter of the hound. The Knight of Flowers reined up at the end of the lists. His lance wasn't even broken. His sapphires winked in the sun as he raised his visor, smiling. The commons went mad for him. In the middle of the field, Sir Gregor Clegane disentangled himself and came boiling to his feet. He wrenched off his helm and slammed it down hard on the ground. His face was dark with fury, and his hair fell down in his eyes. "My sword!" he shouted to his squire, and the boy ran it out to him. By then his stallion was back on its feet as well. Gregor Clegane killed the horse with a single blow of such ferocity that it half severed the animal's neck. Cheers turned to shrieks in a heartbeat. The stallion went to its knees, screaming as it died. By then Gregor was striding down the lists towards Sir Loras Tyrell, his bloody sword clutched in his fist. "Stop him!" Ned shouted, but his words were lost in the roar. Everyone else was shouting as well, and Sansa was crying. It all happened so fast. The Knight of Flowers was shouting for his own sword as Sir Gregor knocked his squire aside and made a jab for the reins of his horse. The mare scented blood and reared. Loras Tyrell kept his seat, but barely. Sir Gregor swung his sword, a savage two-handed blow that took the boy in the chest and knocked him from the saddle. The courser dashed away in panic as Sir Loras lay stunned in the dirt. But as Gregor lifted his sword for the killing blow, a rasping voice warned, "Leave him be," and a steel-clad hand wrenched him away from the boy. The mountain pivoted in a wordless fury, swinging his longsword in a killing arc with all his massive strength behind it, but the hound caught the blow and turned it. And for what seemed an eternity, the two brothers stood hammering at each other as the dazed Loras Tyrell was helped to safety. Thrice Ned saw Sir Gregor aim savage blows at the hound's head helmet. Yet not once did Sandor send a cut at his brother's unprotected face. It was the king's voice that put an end to it, The king's voice and 20 swords. Sean Aaron had told them that a commander needs a good battlefield voice, and Robert had proved the truth of that on the trident. He used that voice now. "Stop this madness!" he boomed. "In the name of your king!" The hound went to one knee. Sir Gregor's blow cut the air, and at last he came to his senses. He dropped his sword and glared at Robert, surrounded by his king's guard and a dozen other knights and guardsmen. Wordlessly he turned and strode off, shoving past Barristan Selmy. "Let him go," Robert said, and as quickly as that it was over. "Is the hound the champion now?" Sansa asked Ned. "No," he told her. "There will be one final joust between the hound and the Knight of Flowers." But Sansa had the right of it after all. A few moments later, Sir Loras Tyrell walked back onto the field in a simple linen doublet and said to Sandor Clegane, "I owe you my life. The day is yours, sir." "I am no sir," the hound replied, but he took the victory and the champion's purse, and, for perhaps the first time in his life, the love of the commons. They cheered him as he left the lists to return to his pavilion. As Ned walked with Sansa to the archery field, Littlefinger and Lord Renly and some of the others fell in with them. "Tyrell had to know the mare was in heat," Littlefinger was saying. "I swear the boy planned the whole thing. Gregor has always favoured huge, ill-tempered stallions with more spirit than sense." The notion seemed to amuse him. It did not amuse Barristan Selmy. "There is small honour in tricks," the old man said stiffly. "Small honour and 20,000 golds," Lord Renly smiled. That afternoon, a boy named Angui, an unheralded commoner from the Dornish marshes, won the archery competition, outshooting Sir Balon Swan and Jalabar Ho at 100 paces, after all the other bowmen had been eliminated at shorter distances. Ned sent Elin to seek him out and offer him her position with the Hand's Guard, but the boy was flush with wine and victory and riches undreamed of, and he refused. The melee went on for 3 hours. Near 40 men took part, free riders and hedge knights and new-made squires in search of a reputation. They fought with blunted weapons in a chaos of mud and blood, small troops fighting each other, and then turning on each other as alliances formed and fractured, until only one man was left standing. The victor was the Red Priest, Thoros of Myr, a madman who shaved his head and fought with a flaming sword. He had won melees before. The fire sword frightened the mounts of the other riders, and nothing frightened Thoros. The final tally was 3 broken limbs, a shattered collarbone, a dozen smashed fingers, 2 horses that had to be cut down, and more cuts, sprains, and bruises than anyone cared to count. Ned was desperately pleased that Robert had not taken part. That night at the feast, Eddard Stark was more hopeful than he had been in a great while. Robert was in high good humour, the Lannisters were nowhere to be seen, and even his daughters were behaving. Jory brought Arya down to join them, and Sansa spoke to her sister pleasantly. "The tournament was magnificent," she sighed. "You should have come. How was your dancing?" "I'm sore all over," Arya repeated happily, proudly displaying a huge purple bruise on her leg. "You must be a terrible dancer," Sansa said doubtfully. Later, while Sansa was off listening to a troupe of singers perform the complex round of interwoven ballads called The Dance of the Dragons, Ned inspected the bruise himself. "I hope Farrell is not being too hard on you," he said. Arya stood on one leg. She was getting much better at that of late. "Syrio says that every hurt is a lesson, and every lesson makes you better." Ned frowned. The man Syrio Farrell had come with an excellent reputation, and his flamboyant Bravosi style was well suited to Arya's slender blade. Yet still. A few days ago she'd been wandering around with a swatch of black silk tied over her eyes. Syrio was teaching her to see with her ears and her nose and her skin, she said. Before that he'd had her doing spins and backflips. "Arya, are you sure you want to persist in this?" She nodded. "Tomorrow we're going to catch cats." "Cats," Ned sighed. "Perhaps it was a mistake to hire this Bravosi. If you like, I will ask Jory to take over your lessons, or I might have a quiet word with Sir Barristan. He was the finest sword in the 7 Kingdoms in his youth." "I don't want them," Arya said. "I want Syrio." Ned ran his fingers through his hair. Any decent master-at-arms could give Arya the rudiments of slash and parry without this nonsense of blindfolds, cartwheels, and hopping about on one leg, but he knew his youngest daughter well enough to know there was no arguing with the stubborn jut of jaw. "As you wish," he said. "Surely she'll grow tired of this soon. Try to be careful." "I will," she promised solemnly as she hopped smoothly from her right leg to her left. Much later, when he'd taken the girls back through the city and seen them safe to bed, Sansa with her dreams and Arya with her bruises, Ned ascended to his own chambers atop the Tower of the Hand. The day had been warm and the room was close and stuffy. Ned went to the window and unfastened the heavy shutters to let in the cool night air. Across the great yard he noticed the flickering glow of candlelight from Littlefinger's windows. The hour was well past midnight. Down by the river, the revels were only now beginning to dwindle and die. He took out the dagger and studied it. Littlefinger's blade, won by Tyrion Lannister in a tourney wager, sent to slay Bran in his sleep. Why? Why would the dwarf want Bran dead? Why would anyone want Bran dead? The dagger, Bran's fall, all of it was somehow linked to the murder of Jon Arryn. He could feel it in his gut. But the truth of Jon's death remained as clouded to him as when he had started. Lord Stannis had not returned to King's Landing for the tourney. Lysa Arryn had held her silence between the high walls of the Eyrie. The squire was dead, and Jory was still searching the whorehouses. What did he have but Robert's bastard? That the armourer's sullen apprentice was the king's son, Ned had no doubt. The Baratheon look was stamped on his face, in his jaw, his eyes, the black hair. Renly was too young to have fathered a boy of that age, Stannis too cold and proud in his honour. Gendry had to be Robert's. Yet knowing all of that, what had he learned? The king had other base-born children scattered throughout the Seven Kingdoms. He'd openly acknowledged one of his bastards, a boy of Bran's age whose mother was highborn. The lad was being fostered by Lord Renly's Castellan at Storm's End. Ned remembered Robert's first child as well, a daughter born in the Vale when Robert was scarcely more than a boy himself. A sweet little girl. The young Lord of Storm's End had doted on her. He used to make daily visits to play with the babe, long after he'd lost interest in the mother. Ned was often dragged along for company, whether he willed it or not. The girl would be 17 or 18 by now, he realized. Older than Robert had been when he'd fathered her. A strange thought. Cersei could not have been pleased by her lord husband's bye-blows, yet in the end it mattered little whether the king had one bastard or 100. Law and custom gave the baseborns few rights. Gendry, the girl in the Vale, the boy at Storm's End, none of them could ever threaten Robert's true-born children. His musings were ended by a soft rap at his door. "A man to see you, my lord," Harwin called. "He will not give his name." "Send him in," Ned said, wondering. The visitor was a stout man in cracked, mud-caked boots and a heavy brown robe of the coarsest rough-spun, his features hidden by a cowl, his hands drawn up into voluminous sleeves. "Who are you?" Ned asked. "A friend," the cowled man said in a strange, low voice. "We must speak alone, Lord Stark." Curiosity was stronger than caution. "Harwin, leave us," he commanded. Not until they were alone, behind closed doors, did his visitor draw back his cowl. "Lord Varys," Ned said in astonishment. "Lord Stark," Varys said politely, seating himself. "I wonder if I might trouble you for a drink." Ned filled 2 cups with summer wine and handed one to Varys. "I might have passed within a foot of you and never recognized you," he said, incredulous. He'd never seen the eunuch dress in anything but silk and velvet and the richest damasks, and the man smelled of sweat instead of lilacs. "That was my dearest hope," Varys said. "It would not do if certain people learned that we had spoken in private. The Queen watches you closely. The wine is very choice, thank you." "How did you get past my other guards?" Ned asked. Porther and Cain had been posted outside the tower and Ellen on the stairs. "The Red Keep has ways known only to ghosts and spiders," Varys smiled apologetically. "I will not keep you long, my lord. There are things you must know. You are the king's hand, and the king is a fool." The eunuch's cloying tones were gone. Now his voice was thin and sharp as a whip. "Your friend, I know, yet a fool nonetheless, and doomed unless you save him. Today was a near thing. They had hoped to kill him during the melee." For a moment Ned was speechless with shock. "Who?" Varys sipped his wine. "If I truly need to tell you that, you're a bigger fool than Robert, and I am on the wrong side." "The Lannisters," Ned said. "The Queen." "No, I will not believe that, not even of Cersei. She asked him not to fight." "She forbade him to fight, in front of his brother, his knights, and half the court. Tell me truly, do you know any surer way to force King Robert into melee? I ask you." Ned had a sick feeling in his gut. The eunuch had hit upon a truth. Tell Robert Baratheon he could not, should not, or must not do a thing, and it was as good as done. Even if he'd fought, who would have dared strike the king? Varys shrugged. "There were 40 riders in the melee. The Lannisters have many friends. Amidst all that chaos, with horses screaming and bones breaking, and Thoros of Myr waving that absurd fire sword of his, who could name the murderer if a chance blow felled his grace?" He went to the flagon and refilled his cup. "After the deed was done, the slayer would be beside himself with grief. I can almost hear him weeping. So sad. Yet no doubt the gracious and compassionate widow would take pity, lift the poor unfortunate to his feet, and bless him with a gentle kiss of forgiveness. Good King Joffrey would have no choice but to pardon him." The eunuch stroked his cheek. "Or perhaps Cersei would let Sir Ilyn strike off his head. Less risk for the Lannisters that way, though quite an unpleasant surprise for their little friend." Ned felt his anger rise. "You knew this plot, and yet you did nothing." "I command whisperers, not warriors." "You might have come to me earlier." "Oh, yes, I confess it. And you would have rushed straight to the king, yes? And when Robert heard of this peril, what would he have done, I wonder?" Ned considered that. "He would have damned them all and fought anyway to show he didn't fear them." Varys spread his hands. "I will make another confession, Lord Eddard. I was curious to see what you would do. Why not come to me, you ask, and I must answer, why? Because I did not trust you, my lord." "You did not trust me?" Ned was frankly astonished. "The Red Keep shelters 2 sorts of people, Lord Eddard," Varys said. "Those who are loyal to the realm, and those who are loyal only to themselves. Until this morning, I could not say which you would be, so I waited to see. And now I know, for a certainty." He smiled a plump, tight smile, and for a moment his private face and public mask were gone. "I begin to comprehend why the Queen fears you so much. Oh yes, I do." "You are the one she ought to fear," Ned said. "No, I am what I am. The king makes use of me, but it shames him. A most puissant warrior is our Robert, and such a manly man he has little love for sneaks and spies and eunuchs. If a day should come when Cersei whispers, 'Kill that man,' Ilyn Payne will snick off my head in a twinkling, and who will mourn poor Varys then? North or south, they sing no songs for spiders." He reached out and touched Ned with a soft hand. "But you, Lord Stark, I think. No, I know. He would not kill you, not even for his queen. And there may lie our salvation." It was all too much. For a moment, Eddard Stark wanted nothing so much as to return to Winterfell, the clean simplicity of the north, where the enemies were winter and the wildlings beyond the wall. "Surely Robert has other loyal friends," he protested. "His brothers, his—" "Wife," Varys finished with a smile that cut. "His brothers hate the Lannisters, true enough, but hating the Queen and loving the King are not quite the same thing, are they? Sir Barristan loves his honour, Grand Maester Pycelle loves his office, and Littlefinger loves Littlefinger. The King's Guard? A paper shield," the eunuch said. "Try not to look so shocked, Lord Stark. Jaime Lannister is himself a sworn brother of the Seven Swords, and we all know what his oath is worth. The days when men like Ryan Redwine and Prince Aemon the Dragon Knight wore the white cloak are gone to dust and song. Of these 7, only Sir Barristan Selmy is made of the true steel, and Selmy is old. Sir Boros and Sir Merrin are the Queen's creatures to the bone, and I have deep suspicions of the others. No, my lord, when the swords come out in earnest, you will be the only one true friend Robert Baratheon will have. Robert must be told, Ned said. If what you say is true, if even a part of it is true, the king must hear it for himself. And what proof shall we lay before him? My word against theirs? My little birds against the Queen and the Kingslayer? Against his brothers and his council? Against the wardens of the east and west? Against all the might of Casterly Rock? Pray send for Sir Ellen directly, and it will save us all some time. I know where that road ends. Yet if what you say is true, they will only bide their time and make another attempt. Indeed they will, said Varys, and sooner rather than later, I do fear. You are making them most anxious, Lord Eddard, but my little birds will be listening, and together we may be able to forestall them, you and I. He rose and pulled his cowl so that his face was hidden once more. Thank you for the wine. We will speak again. When you see me next at council, be certain to treat me with your accustomed contempt. You should not find it difficult. He was at the door when Ned called, Varys. The eunuch turned back. How did Jon Arryn die? I wondered whether you would get around to that. Tell me. The Tears of Lys, they call it. A rare and costly thing, clear and sweet as water, and it leaves no trace. I begged Lord Arryn to use a taster, and this very room I begged him, but he would not hear of it. Only one who was less than a man would think of such a thing, he told me. Ned had to know the rest. Who gave him the poison? Some dear sweet friend who often shared meat and mead with him, no doubt. Oh, but which one? There were so many. Lord Arryn was a kindly, trusting man. The eunuch sighed. There was one boy. All he was, he owed Jon Arryn, but when the widow fled to the Eyrie with her household, he stayed in King's Landing and prospered. It always gladdens my heart to see the young rise in the world. The whip was in his voice again, every word a stroke. He must have cut a gallant figure in the tourney, him in his bright new armour, with those crescent moons on his cloak. A pity he died so untimely, and before you could talk to him. Ned felt half-poisoned himself. The squire, he said. Sir Hugh. Wheels within wheels within wheels. Ned's head was pounding. Why? Why now? Jon Arryn had been hand for 14 years. What was he doing that they would want to kill him? Asking questions, Varys said, slipping out the door.
So yeah, I thought it was interesting. In this chapter, we have another Clegane versus the Hound. Well, Clegane versus Clegane. I mean, Gregor versus Sandor. Clegane.
The Mountain versus the Hound.
Yes.
Just to keep it simple for people.
Yeah. As I throw around every version of their name there is. This time, physical.
A Clegane Bowl, if you will.
Clegane again.
I thought it was pretty clever of Loras Tyrell to be like, I'm going to use a mirror that's in heat.
I know.
Barristan Selmy didn't like it, but listen, if I was Loras Tyrell, this like slender, small, like live young guy versus a dude that is literally almost 8 feet tall, I would use every trick I had to.
Yeah. You're the size of this man's bicep.
Yeah.
So, yeah, why not?
Way to go. Maybe Loras Tyrell is a little bit of a Slytherin.
Maybe.
A little bit of a Slytherin trick, I think.
I think the Mountain is a little bit of a psychopath, though.
Yeah, he kind of lost it a little bit.
He lost. He killed his horse, and then went to go kill Loras Tyrell.
And his horse. I think he would have killed his horse, too.
Yeah, he probably would have killed him. But the horse ran away. He didn't go for his horse.
I thought it was terrible that he killed the horse. Every
I
time
know.
I read that, I was like, no, that's not fair. He just wanted to do a sexy time.
This is what being horny gets you. Shame.
In Game of Thrones.
Shame. You know, now that I'm thinking about it, sex gets people in a lot of trouble in Game of Thrones.
Yeah, it does.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it really does.
The only flaw in Catelyn and Eddard's relationships because he couldn't keep it in his pants.
Yep.
The whole story plot at this point has taken place just because Jaime couldn't keep it in his pants over his sister.
Robert couldn't keep it in his pants either.
And that's true.
A lot of times.
Mm-hmm.
As Ned tells us.
Yes.
I feel like this Ned chapter was to push the story along a little bit, but also to give us a little more backstory and exposition on Robert in the past and all of that stuff.
I also think it was to answer some of your questions to get you deeper invested in the story.
Yep. And we find out that who are Robert's squires or whatever? Lannisters.
Mm-hmm.
Lancel, I think.
Yes, Lancel and... I don't know.
I don't remember the other one's name. I just remember that one because it's like alliterative. Lancel Lannister.
Well, I think they mentioned it in the last Eddard chapter, right? When he was talking to him in the tent, and he was telling him not to fight in the melee.
Wasn't that this chapter?
Oh, was it?
This chapter.
Oh, it was.
This chapter was just really long.
Yeah.
Because he tells him not to fight. Robert gets mad at him, and Barristan's tell me.
Yeah.
And he's like,
too fat. You're right, Ned.
Look what being king's done to me. I'm fat now. I love that Ned can just say that, and Robert he'll just take it. Because it's Ned. Ned's probably the only person that can say that.
Yeah.
Also...
Well, I mean, was it Sir Barristan they said, get out or I'll kill you?
Yeah.
Ned, you're alright.
Yeah.
Even though you're the one who said it.
But you're good. And again, we get another Robert talking about Lyanna moment where, again, he just can't let her go because he's like,
get over.
Lyanna would have never said blah blah blah. And Ned's like, actually, she probably would have, and she might have been more mean about it. Don't know how well you really did know my sister. Just saying.
Mm-hmm. And the king just wants to up and quit his job and run away to the free cities and
drink and hoard his way.
Go party.
Yeah.
Which I think we can all relate to. There was a point where we were all fed up with our jobs and we were like, I'm just going to quit. I'm going to go to Europe and just...
never come back.
Exactly. Or some other country.
Or wherever, yeah.
I feel like a lot of it's usually Europe. Or Mexico.
Japan.
Sometimes Canada.
Japan. I feel like so much happened in this chapter, but also here's another thing. Yes, it's always fun to have Robert and Eddard talk to each other because the conversations are always funny.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Like, and Robert's just entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
He's just fun to read.
I know. He's the Slughorn of this story.
Yeah, in a way.
Once great wizard, put on a lot of weight. Still
has some formidable skill, but
but not.
He just wants to live his life.
Mm-hmm. Not enough skill that he would have survived the melee if Ned had not talked him out of it.
Fair enough.
Because we found out that the Lannisters
are trying
to kill him.
Yes.
And
courtesy of Varys.
Yes. And more than that, Varys tells us that the boy who died at the melee, or not the melee, the joust by the mountain, was the one who poisoned.
John Aaron.
Mm-hmm. So was his death an accident?
And was the mountain killing him just the mountain wanting to kill someone? Or was he supposed to silence him?
Mm-hmm. Someone else pulling the strings?
And what does Ned say? Ned goes, why would someone poison John Aaron? And Varys says, because he was asking questions.
Mm-hmm.
Asking questions about what?
Yes. And unfortunately, Eddard asked a lot of questions.
Yeah, Eddard's asking a lot of questions.
Mm-hmm.
And reading a lot of books. No.
Gonna get too smart for your own good.
Not
Viserys. Varys also mentions that the poison used is John Aaron says no man would resort to such a thing.
Oh, poison?
Yeah. No man.
No man.
Exactly.
So,
The phrasing.
could be important.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
There's other characters who are not men.
Yes, there are. Believe it or not.
Mhm.
I also like the little Ned and Sansa moment that they have. Because they don't really have a lot of, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right out of the gate, you know that like Ned naturally gets along really well with Arya.
Mm,
But I feel like with his relationship with Sansa, he has to work a little harder.
yeah.
But even with her, he genuinely is trying to be like a good dad.
Well, yeah.
And
Eddard's the honorable one, of course. He's always going to be a good dad.
I
think we've seen through multiple occasions that he's a very good dad and tries his best with his kids.
also, good guy Robert for telling Ned he was sorry about Lady.
Yeah.
Just telling him, like, look, man, I'm really sorry. My kid's an asshole. And my wife was... there was nothing I could do. I'm really sorry.
Yeah.
Also, just...
And he seems really concerned about that, too.
I was gonna
Robert, because Eddard was like, oh, well, we were those crazy kids, too. And he's like, no. No, we were not.
No.
Not like Joffrey.
No. Yeah,
Joffrey is different.
There's something wrong with Joffrey. Mm-hmm. He alludes to... Joffrey's not just wild. There's something off about him. You don't know him like I do. So... Doesn't he say that's like one of the only reasons why he hasn't run away to go party?
Yeah, because he doesn't want Joffrey to be king.
Yeah. So maybe we'll find out a little more about that at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Why Robert is so concerned over his son.
Maybe we will.
I mean, at this point, he seems like the ultimate Malfoy, but...
He does. But Robert doesn't seem like the Lucius. I can definitely see Cersei as Malfoy's mother, though.
Oh, she's definitely got Narcissa qualities. I'm trying to think of who I would equate Robert to.
Robert, we already said Slughorn.
Slughorn, yeah. There's a little bit of Hagrid in there, too. Hagrid likes to party.
Yeah, he drinks like Hagrid, yeah.
I mean, Hagrid, how many times does Hagrid get shit faced in front of Harry, Ron, and Hermione?
That's true.
Like, it happens a lot. And then he makes bad decisions, like buying dragon's eggs.
Before we get too far into the Harry Potter, throwing it back to the Sansa Eddard thing. Sansa was cheering on the Hound.
Yes, I know, right?
When the Mountain and him got into his big fight.
And then when he wins the tourney, she's like, I knew the Hound would win. Ned's probably sitting there.
Even though it was kind of...
by default.
Yeah.
Like, he won because Loras Tyrell.
Loras is a good guy.
He's a good guy.
He's an honorable guy.
Yeah.
He's probably not going to last long.
But he still won. And yeah, I wonder what Ned was thinking when he's sitting there and Sansa's like, I knew he would win. Like, what? Yeah, are you my child? What? You're rooting for this guy? What? Also,
Don't run away with him.
a little backstory on the mountain. He's crazy.
Well, yeah.
People just randomly disappearing at his castle.
Mm-hmm.
His wives all dying under mysterious circumstances.
His third wife now.
Dude, if I was betrothed to that man, I would be running away to the free city. That is happening.
I mean, no offense to anyone, but if you're on a third wife, you either just don't know how to pick them, or you got something wrong. You're doing something wrong. You need to fix.
I feel like
And I think with him, what he's doing wrong is, well, maybe not knowing his own strength.
Oh, I think he's totally, like, a psychopathic, like, sadist. And he's...
Well, you saw he gets angry, so I mean...
That's what I mean, he gets angry, but I think he, like, hurts people for
I said
fun.
I wanted meatloaf, not hamburgers! Damn. Second wife.
I think he also hurts people for fun. I think that's one of his things. I think he likes to hurt people for fun.
Well, yeah.
In gruesome ways. I bet he's got a whacked out torture chamber at his castle. That's why no one goes there.
That could be it.
And maybe part of why the Hound, as soon as he turned, 18, was like, F this, I'm out. I'm never coming back. Screw this.
Well, yeah.
Also, his dad died in a hunting accident. Like, the mountain's bad news.
Yeah.
Like, everything you read about this guy just gets worse and worse and worse. He's not a good dude.
No, he's not.
He's not a good dude. He's like 8 feet tall, so he's not a good dude, but he will literally kick anyone's ass. Ever.
I feel like even though we haven't followed the mountain in any of these chapters, these past 2 chapters have been mountain chapters.
Yeah,
He's been the big focus.
Yeah, because you're finding out all this information about this guy. He's not like in it, but he takes such a big part of the focus of the story.
And we know what happened to John Aaron now.
Yes.
And
Poor guy. Asking
you know,
questions.
Varys might be on that side?
Right?
Maybe?
Maybe, possibly.
Well, no, he says, what does Varys say? You either are for yourself or for the realm.
Yes.
So maybe
Viserys
Varys isn't. I know I do the same thing. Maybe Varys isn't on Ned's side, but as long as Eddard is on the realm side, they're on the same team.
I think Varys... I want to say this the right way. I think Varys has made a case for himself being... I'm your best friend if we have the same goals in mind, which is the realm. But if you start putting toes in the other direction and start being selfish, we're going to have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why he's coming to Ned, because he's like, I think you really are not actually for yourself, Lord Stark. I think you could actually be for the people. And this is the first case where we've kind of seen somebody just kind of come out and say, like, whether or not it's true, we don't know, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you've got somebody coming out to say, this isn't about my personal ambitions and what I want in life. This is about something bigger. It's about the people. It's about the realm. And that's what I'm about. Is he lying? It's pretty much everybody in this story is out for themselves. He's like the only person who's not.
Yeah.
At all.
Everyone else is about the politics and scheming and
the power and one-upping each other and trying to gain power over the other. And
I would say I'm very much Eddard. Like, I don't want to deal with any of that. Just want to go to my castle and leave me alone.
Who do you think I
am? I'm not sure. I'll think about it.
Okay.
But speaking of characters, I did notice that they mention a lot of characters. A lot of kings and dukes or whatever they are, and lords.
Houses. Yeah. And who owes fealty to who?
And I didn't realize how many of them are actually like important, integral parts to the story.
Right?
That are mentioned now, and then I feel like aren't even talked about until like 2 or 3 books later.
Well, Catelyn's chapter and these last 2 chapters and the prologue, the Royces are mentioned, right? Because the Lord in the prologue was a Royce lordling, and then they dropped them a couple of times. And then, Lady Went of Harrenhal, the Freys, the red wines, like, I'm trying to remember which ones, like, come to mind.
Yeah.
The Manderleys, I think they mentioned them.
Yeah, I know. And I mean,
it
doesn't really matter because they definitely go in more detail later on, but I'm just surprised at how many like hints and how much information they give you so early that you forget later on, because it's not really an integral part of the story at this point.
Right. And also,
and who knows how many of them they dropped and really don't come up that will come up in later books as they're released. I'm kind of happy we're reading through again before Winds of Winter come out.
In the next, 2 years, we're thinking, right? I don't know.
The last I read was it was supposed to come out around the holidays in 2021. I haven't looked up an article. It's probably been like a month or something like that.
I'm knocking on wood on that one, because... But yeah, you get all these name drops and all these fealty drops, so... And not even names. Some of them are just house sigils that you see. Mm-hmm. You see certain house sigils, and like if you've read the books, you're like, oh, it's them!
Yeah.
But then 3 books later, you get this family, and it's like, oh yeah, who are they bannermen for? Jesus, I don't remember. That was like 2 books ago. I don't know. I am pretty excited for the next chapter because we get to visit someone who we haven't got to visit in a long time, and I'm very excited about it.
Is it Dany?
No.
No? Okay.
Not that exciting.
Arya.
No. But we do get to hang out with Tyrion. He's probably not having a good time.
No. Being a prisoner. Oh, real quick, though. I did get a chuckle from the part where we talk to Arya and she tells Sansa about her dancing lessons.
Oh my god.
And Sansa just walks away like, she's a terrible dancer.
Yeah, I know. Sansa's like, wow.
Water dancing? That's awful. It looks ugly.
Yeah, that little bit with Arya was great. We're gonna go catch cats! I was like, yes! Go catch cats! That sounds fun.
I know, you're like, I want to train now. I want to be a water dancer. You catch cats?
That sounds great. Right, Jackson? Loaf boy. It was cool to get a little Arya update, too. It's just a nice way of updating you with Arya without devoting a whole chapter to her. Even though I like an Arya chapter, but...
Well, yeah.
We'll get one someday, right?
So, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And join us next time to see how Tyrion's faring as a prisoner.